Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Pooja Walia Maan from SGI Samalkha. Today we are going to talk on the module Service Failures and Service Recovery Strategies from the paper Services Marketing. Let us see what we are going to learn in this module. Students, in this module you will learn meaning of service failure, reasons of service failure, consumer reaction to service failures, service recovery paradox, and service recovery management. Have you ever been faced with a situation when you ordered dinner at a restaurant and had to wait for more than 20 minutes for it to be served? What would be your reaction? Let us assume another situation. How would you react in a premium restaurant when served with cold food or maybe stale food? It is expected that you will be loud and voice your concern to the waiter serving or to the manager at the counter. Let us assume another example. You ordered a product online and the e-retailer promised to deliver the product within 2 days, which did not come till 7 days. On contacting the customer care department, you were given an excuse of some transport strike like leading to the delay. How would you react to such a situation? Will you show your dissatisfaction with the services? The delay in serving food, serving cold food, or delay in the delivery of the product from the e-retailer are all the examples of service failures. In this module, let us look at the meaning of service failures and the strategies to manage it in such a way that the consumer feels satisfied. So let us start with the discussion on service failures. Service failures refer to a condition when the consumer does not receive the services as promised by the seller. Service failure leaves a negative experience and in turn a negative image of the service organization. Hence, we understand that a service failure may occur when a consumer does not get the delivery of the service as was promised during the service transaction, when the delivery of the service is delayed or it is too slow to be delivered. The service may not be able to deliver the core benefit due to which the service was sought to be purchased at the first place. Or lastly, when the employees delivering the service or confronting the consumer sounds rude or uncaring. So students, do you think we need to manage the service failures? Whatever be the reason of service failure, it leads a negative experience and in turn a negative image of the service organization. Therefore, yes, it is very important to manage the service failures. Not all dissatisfied consumers may complain to the organization about a service failure. Very few dissatisfied consumers may instead spread a negative word of mouth about the service by sharing their negative experience amongst their own social circles. On the contrary, there may be some consumers who may prefer to take to the legal route to get them compensated for any service failure. Therefore, it is extremely important to ensure that no service failure should occur in service delivery. However, if it does, it should be instantly recovered to please the consumer. In this figure, a number of consumer reactions are shown on having faced a service failure. Any unattended service failure may result in causing a consumer loss. So, what is this concept of service recovery paradox? An effectively solved consumer failure experience may help in building the consumer satisfaction and consumer loyalty and a positive impact of the service provider. Consumers who faced a service failure and were served as per their expectations probably were more satisfied and thus more loyal towards the service organization. In this slide, you look at a recovery paradox in context of services. The concept of recovery paradox suggests that usually a service failure will result in making the consumer highly dissatisfied. However, if the service failure is recovered and the level of service delivery is more than the expectations of the consumers, the consumer will be highly satisfied. This once a dissatisfied consumer is likely to be more loyal and likely to repurchase the service and even highly likely to recommend it to others. Let us discuss an example to understand the concept of service recovery paradox. Assume you order food at a premium self-service restaurant. On being served, you find the food stale or maybe unhygienic. You move up angrily to complain to the manager. The manager courteously apologizes and requests you to enjoy a fresh meal being served with few more delicacies added by manager's choice, that too free of cost. How would you react? Especially a reaction while leaving the restaurant. It is very likely you would be a happy consumer while leaving. It is also likely for you to visit the restaurant again and say a friendly hello to the manager. This means that in most of the service failures, if handled well, the consumer could be made loyal to the service provider. Let us assume another example. A customer books a hotel room online and on arrival, he finds that the same room is not available. In order to recover, the front desk executive offers him an upgraded room, but at no extra cost. This makes the customer not only happy but more loyal to the hotel. You should not be surprised if you find a service provider deliberately planning a service failure and then thrilling the consumer with an over-the-board service delivery to make him loyal. But is it really so attractive as it sounds? No, there are problems in service recovery paradox. The concept of service recovery paradox is very complex. Not all consumers will forget the first bad experience of a service failure, even if they were served well later. The first impression may sometimes be the last impression. This can be explained. Let us consider a flight delay of 3 hours for a business flyer. Even when he is looked after well during the delay, he may still not be a very pleased person if he had to miss a meeting due to the flight delay. Further, for making a consumer happy while he is complaining would require a very high level of service quality. Moreover, fixing a complaint will require more time and money of the executives. Added to all these would be the loud noise that the sulking consumer will make, influencing the perception of the other potential consumers in the proximity. Therefore, it is important to ensure delivering quality service at the first time. The service personnel must make sure that there is no cause for a service failure at the first hand. So, students, what could be the consumer reaction in face of any service failure? A dissatisfied consumer may not take any action in the event of a service failure. If he chooses to take some action, it may be of various types. The first is to complain to the service provider. Here, the dissatisfied consumer reach up to the authorities of the service provider and complain to them on the spot. Now, this is an ideal situation for the service provider to respond immediately and do the damage control. This is the situation in which a higher level of service may satisfy the consumer and avoid losing him, and also control any negative word of mouth. The second reaction could be to spread negative word of mouth. There may be a consumer who choose to speak bad about the services to, let's say, his friends and peers, thereby spreading a negative image of the service provider. Such a situation is potentially very harmful for the service organization, as the firm may not even get to know the root cause of the problem, yet face a very hostile attitude towards its services. The next reaction could be to take no action, but to stop doing business with the service provider. There may be a few consumers who may not react following a service failure, but they may decide never to do business with the service provider again in future. They may simply decide to switch to the competitive brand. But the service provider loses him as a consumer in future. The other reaction could be the level of consumer expectations. In such a situation, a dissatisfied consumer expects a decent apology from the service personnel, along with an attempt of delivering what was promised with due personal attention. These expectations exist even when the consumer is not verbally complaining. Let us talk about a very important aspect: service recovery. Service recovery refers to the attempt of the service provider to manage the service failure causing dissatisfaction to the consumer and ensure quality service delivery. Witnessing a service failure is a very frequent incident in most of the services due to controllable or uncontrollable factors. However, handling such a failure so that the customer is not lost is more crucial. It must be noted that a service recovery action may be initiated not only after a consumer complains, but also by the service personnel themselves coming up, if they feel that they have failed at any level in offering the quality service. In case of a complaint being made by the consumer for a service failure, there are a number of expected reactions from the service provider. Let us talk about these one by one. The first such reaction could be the courteous confrontation. In the event of a complaint being made by the consumer about a service failure, it is important that the service personnel acknowledges and accepts the complaint in the most courteous and open manner. Any dissent or unwillingness to accept the complaint may lead to a higher level of dissatisfaction amongst the consumer who is already unhappy with the service. The interaction with the consumer at the time of complaint should be made so warm that the complaining consumer is convinced that the service provider is genuinely interested in facilitating the aggrieved consumer on the issue of service failure. The words, the tone, and the body language of the service personnel handling the consumer plays an important role in pacifying the complaining consumer. The second is the procedure of the service recovery. For the service provider, it is important to seek the details leading to the service failure in order to offer compensation to the consumer. However, the procedure involved in recording the details of the service failure and the steps involved in the offering of the service recovery should be simple and convenient, such that the consumer does not get irritated. If a complaining consumer has to follow a complicated and a long process of filing a complaint and getting a compensation, this may further add to his dissatisfaction with the service provider. On the other hand, a swift and simple procedure would be useful in doing the damage control. Next is the fair compensation. Once the service provider is convinced that there has been a service failure, it should not only be quick in offering the compensation, but should also offer a compensation which is perceived as worth the inconvenience caused to the consumer due to the service failure. For this, many a times, service organizations keep a policy ready for service recovery by laying down the principles according to which the compensation may be offered to the consumers. Policies may be designed keeping in mind the needs of the consumers' past business transactions with the company, extent of consumer inconvenience or damage due to service failure, and the financial burden on the organization. Often, the consumer would expect an apology, a discount, credit, or a refund in the event of a service failure. The service provider must identify the consumer expectations and offer a recovery accordingly. So, can there be a success mantra of any service recovery? Well, the success of service failure recovery depends upon three broad factors. Firstly, the customer relationship and association with the service provider. Secondly, the damage incurred to the consumer due to the service failure. And thirdly, the perceived level of service quality during the first time. One such element is the customer association with the service firm. The reaction of a consumer to a service failure is largely dependent upon the time since the consumer is dealing with the organization. Often, the service expectations of a new consumer is high as compared to the one who has been dealing with the organization since some time. A new consumer may be looking towards a good deal even in the service recovery, else he will be quick to switch the service provider. Since the older consumers have already experienced the service quality, they may be easy to be pleased with the service recovery efforts due to personal interaction of the past. Consumers who wish to continue dealing with the organization in future would also have lower level of service performance expectations. Service recovery in case of older consumers or in case of consumers wishing to be associated with the organization in future will be easy to satisfy during the service recovery. This is not to suggest that the service personnel should not take the service recovery efforts of an older consumers on a priority. This only suggests that they would be easy to be convinced about the uncontrollable nature of a service failure occurrence. The other element is damage caused due to the service failure. While the service organization should immediately spring into action of a service recovery to save a consumer from being lost, the level of satisfaction of the consumer directly depends upon the harm done to the consumer due to the service failure. As discussed in a previous example, if a consumer has missed an important meeting or a conference due to the flight delay with no reasonable excuse, it may be difficult to offer him a convincing service recovery. Another element is the quality of original service. This is another important aspect of success of service recovery. That is, the quality of the original service being offered. If the level of service performance was really bad the first time, convincing a complaining consumer may only make him less vulnerable, but he may be lost for any future business interactions. This is so because the consumer develops a negative attitude about the service performance standards and thus may not be willing to give it another try and therefore indulges in spreading a bad word of mouth. An important thing to discuss here is the management of service recovery. Well, while there can be no substitute of doing it right the first time, there still should be a mechanism in place for service recovery in any event of service failure. While every service provider works to deliver quality service to its consumers in order to sustain and grow, there might be some uncontrollable variables leading to a service failure. This slide shows the effective service recovery management. While there is no denying that service personnel should be well trained to do it right the first time, they should also be trained to handle a complaining consumer effectively so that neither the consumer indulges in negative word of mouth nor the future business of the firm is lost. The first is to have a feedback receiving desk. For a service manager to ensure that the service is delivered right at the first time, it is important to be alert to any complaint being felt by the consumer. For this, consumer feedback is one such means. You might have filled some short consumer feedbacks after being served at hotels and restaurants like KFC. There may be some locked boxes installed in the vicinity of the consumer to drop in a complaint or any happy or sad experience. Often, the consumers support toll-free contact numbers or email IDs may also be widely publicized for the purpose of soliciting the consumer feedback. On receiving encouraging feedbacks, the service manager would be able to assess the strength of service delivery and ensure that the standards of performance are raised further. On evaluating the complaints, the service manager will have an opportunity to recover the service. The next is to have a swift recovery mechanism. The service manager must develop a quick and simple system of service recovery. The service personnel should be appropriately communicated about the process and duly trained in handling a service failure quickly and up to the level of satisfaction of a complaining consumer. The service personnel must be explained that they would have only one last opportunity to please and retain a consumer in case of a service failure, which may be caused due to any controllable or uncontrollable factor. So students, now let us summarize what we have learned in this module. Every service provider aims to serve the consumers with the best of their efforts and satisfy them as per their expectations. However, there may be situations in which the consumer is not able to satisfy his needs for which he is paying. There may also be a dissatisfaction amongst the consumers if they do not receive what was promised to them at the time of service price negotiations. Such a gap in the consumer's perception and the actual service delivery is known as a service failure. Occurrence of a service failure is not uncommon, even in old or big service organizations. These may be due to human or technical reasons, which may be controllable or sometimes uncontrollable. An intelligent service provider always develops a mechanism to foresee such a service failure and designs a service recovery mechanism to satisfy the consumer quickly and efficiently so as to retain him. Service recovery is an attempt by the service provider to satisfy the complaining consumer by compensating him with something that he values in the most courteous manner. Service personnel should be well trained to handle a service failure and execute a service recovery plan to ensure that the consumer is satisfied and retained. Thank you.